11 men walked into Nathan Cole's garage that night expecting to break a mechanic. They had done it 10 times before, 20 times. They came with crowbars, threats, and the confidence of men who had never once been made to answer for anything. What they didn't know, what nobody in Belhaven knew, was that the quiet man in the oil-stained jacket waiting behind that steel door had once neutralized enemy combatants in the dark with nothing but his hands and 18 seconds of silence. Tonight, Nathan Cole was done being patient. If this story already has your pulse going, hit that like button right now and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if you don't want to miss what happens next, because trust me, this one goes places, subscribe and follow the channel. The best stories are just getting started. The garage had a smell that Nathan could identify in complete darkness. Motor oil soaked into concrete. Rust lifted off old chrome with a wire brush. Rubber belting left to dry near the space heaters. It was the smell of his father's hands, the smell of Saturday mornings when he was 8 years old and handed a rag he didn't know what to do with, and the smell of the first morning after his wife's funeral when he came downstairs at 4 a.m. because sleep had simply stopped working and didn't know where else to go. He'd been standing in the garage's side bay for the past 20 minutes, pretending to work on a '68 Camaro that didn't need any more work done tonight. He wasn't pretending very well. The Camaro's hood was up, his hands were on the engine block, but his eyes kept drifting to the security monitor he'd mounted on the south wall 6 weeks ago, the small screen partitioned into 4 feeds from cameras he'd installed himself, covering every angle of the property. Front lot, back alley, side fence, the interior. Outside, past the chain link and the 2 flood lamps he'd rewired last Tuesday, Belhaven was quiet in the way that certain kinds of nights got quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Pre-storm quiet. He checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. His daughter Lily was asleep upstairs. That was the only thing that mattered right now. She was upstairs, door locked, with her phone charged and his number on speed dial and strict instructions that she did not come down for any reason, for any sound, until he came up himself and knocked 3 times. She was 11. She'd stopped asking why a few weeks ago, and that bothered Nathan more than the threats did. He picked up his coffee mug from the tool cart, found it cold, and set it back down. On the monitor, the front lot stayed empty. Nathan Cole had grown up in Belhaven. The garage had belonged to his father, and before that to his grandfather, who'd started it as a 2-bay operation out of what used to be a fish storage shed near the docks. The Cole family had been on this particular strip of waterfront property for 61 years. That fact apparently made them an obstacle. The letters had started arriving 14 months ago. Clean white envelopes with the Ashbourne Crown Development letterhead, very polite, very formal, offering a fair market price for the property and the business goodwill and all existing equipment. The first letter was reasonable enough that Nathan had actually called the number on the back and spoken to a woman named Sandra who had a practiced, warm telephone voice and said things like wonderful opportunity and exciting transformation and the whole corridor is going to change, Mr. Cole. He'd told Sandra he wasn't interested. The second letter arrived 3 weeks later and offered 12% more. He told them no again. By the 5th letter, the number had climbed significantly and the language had grown slightly less warm. By the 8th letter, the warmth was gone entirely, and something harder had taken its place between the lines. Nothing you could take to a lawyer exactly, but a particular tone that Nathan recognized from a different context, from a different life. The tone of people who weren't accustomed to being told no and had begun working through what to do about that. The first incident came on a Wednesday in November. Someone threw a rock through the plate glass window on the east side of the building. Could have been random. Happened in Belhaven sometimes. The second incident came 4 days later. His compressor lines were cut. Not frayed, cut. Clean diagonal slices through both primary feeds. After the third incident, a fire in the parts storage room. Small, caught early, nothing provably arson. Nathan drove to the Belhaven police station and spoke to a desk sergeant named Briggs who wrote everything down and looked appropriately concerned and told Nathan they'd follow up. Nothing followed up. By the 7th incident, Nathan stopped going to the police. By the 14th incident, he understood clearly what was happening and began quietly, methodically preparing for what came next. This was not the first time in Nathan Cole's life that he had recognized an enemy's pattern of escalation. It was, however, the first time he had chosen to let the escalation continue until the moment of his own choosing. Patience was not passivity. That was something the military had taught him so thoroughly it had become cellular. It lived in the slow part of his brain where instinct operated. You watched, you mapped, you let the opposing side believe they understood the situation. And when you finally moved, you moved with everything at once. He'd been watching and mapping for 7 months. Dad. The voice came from the internal intercom he'd run from Lily's room down to the garage. An old baby monitor system he'd repurposed, which Lily found mildly humiliating and which Nathan didn't particularly care about. He pressed the talk button on the wall unit. "You're supposed to be asleep." "I know." A pause. "I heard something outside." "I've got eyes on everything. You're okay." "I know I'm okay. I'm not scared." Another pause, the kind that meant she was figuring out how to say the actual thing. "Are you okay?" Nathan looked at the monitor, still empty. "I'm good, Lil. 3 knocks when it's time to come down, remember?" "Yeah." Her voice was quiet. Not a child's voice anymore, not exactly. She was growing up faster than she was supposed to because the situation required it, and that was a thing Nathan lived with every day. "Okay, 3 knocks. Get some sleep." The intercom clicked off. He looked at the Camaro. He looked at the monitor. He picked up the coffee mug again, remembered it was cold, and this time actually walked it over to the small machine on the workbench and poured it out and made fresh. At 12:14 a.m., the front lot camera picked up movement. They came in 2 vehicles, a dark utility van that parked half a block down, and a pickup truck that rolled without headlights into the lot itself, which meant they'd either done this enough times to be casual about it, or they were trying to project confidence they didn't fully have. Nathan had learned to read the difference. He watched the monitor as doors opened. Men climbed out. He counted them once, then counted again. 11. They'd sent 3 last time, then 5, then 8. The escalation was reaching its ceiling. You couldn't keep quietly mobilizing larger crews for what was supposed to look like random harassment without creating serious logistical problems for yourself. 11 men was probably the maximum they could move without it becoming something different, something that started requiring documentation. 11 men with crowbars and bolt cutters, and on at least 2 of them, the kind of jacket bulge that Nathan clocked without thinking about it. He set down his coffee. He walked to the breaker panel on the north wall and stood in front of it for a moment. Then he reached up and tripped 4 specific breakers in a sequence, and the exterior flood lamps went dark. The lot camera immediately switched to low light, and the image on the monitor went gray-green and grainier but still functional. He could see them clearly. They couldn't see much of anything now. He moved to the front of the garage to the main vehicle doors and engaged the interior deadbolt system he'd installed himself. 3-inch steel bolts, top and bottom, not the flimsy original hardware. He checked the side door, checked the back. All secured. Then he went to the workbench and retrieved his phone and opened the app connected to the 4 cameras and tapped Record All and watched the icon turn red. Everything from this point forward was being captured and time-stamped and uploaded in real time to a cloud account that 2 people other than Nathan had access to. One of them, a federal investigator he'd been in contact with for the past 3 weeks. The other, his attorney in Harwick. He'd wanted those cameras rolling for 6 months. He'd needed the right moment. He needed the threat level to reach a point where what they were doing was unambiguous and serious enough to matter in a courtroom. 11 armed men, on camera, breaking into a private property. That would do it. He heard the first impact against the side door. A solid metallic bang, someone testing it with a kick, maybe a shoulder. Then voices he couldn't make out clearly, low and conferring. Nathan moved to the center of the garage floor. The main vehicle door shuddered as something heavy connected with it from outside. They had something with them, a ram of some kind, improvised probably, based on the dull thud of it. The door held. He'd reinforced it. "Hey!" A voice from outside, not bothering to be quiet anymore. Male, 30s, trying to sound like this was entirely routine. "You in there, Cole? Open up and we can keep this simple." Nathan didn't say anything. "We're not here to hurt you, man. Just want to talk about the property. Your boss, the development company, they're being real patient with you. That patience runs out eventually." More silence from Nathan. He heard them moving around the building, trying the other entry points, finding them all locked. He could track their positions in his peripheral vision on the monitor. Some of them were getting impatient. He could hear it in the way the sounds changed, the deliberate knocking giving way to harder, angrier impacts. "Last time we came here, we were nice about it," the voice called again. "This time's different. You understand me? Whatever you got stored in there, the files, whatever your wife left you, that stuff needs to come out. Easy way or not easy way is entirely up to you." Nathan's jaw tightened at that. Not dramatically, just a small, barely visible shift in the muscles, the kind of thing no one in the room would have seen because there was no one in the room. His wife's name was Claire. She had died of an aggressive cancer 2 years and 4 months ago, and before she died, she had given him a manila envelope containing documents she'd quietly assembled over the previous year. Documents that she told him to protect without explaining at the time exactly why, because she was already sick and frightening, and she made him promise to keep them safe first and ask questions later. He had kept the promise. He was still asking questions. He was getting close to the answers. The side door started giving. They had better tools on it now. He could hear the frame beginning to groan. It would hold another couple of minutes, maybe 3. Nathan crossed the garage floor to the shelving unit on the east wall, the tall metal industrial shelving that held parts inventory, and he reached behind the second shelf from the bottom and retrieved the slim case he'd placed there 2 days ago. He unzipped it, checked the contents, zipped it closed. He set it aside without opening it further. He'd spent 11 years in the Navy, 8 of those years as a SEAL. He'd done things in that time and in those places that he had closed carefully behind a particular kind of interior door, the kind you couldn't open from the outside. He didn't talk about it. He hadn't talked about it in years. Not even to Claire. Not most of it. He had come home and deliberately, consciously made himself into someone else. A mechanic, a neighbor, a father. A man with grease under his fingernails and a bad back and a daughter who needed lunch packed and permission slips signed. He wasn't violent by nature. That was the thing people always got wrong about men like him. He'd done violence when the mission required it, with precision and without drama, and then he'd put it back in the case and left it there. But there was a difference between choosing not to use something and not knowing how. The side door came open with a grinding pop of the upper bolt giving way, and cold night air pushed into the garage, and the first man through the door was heavy-shouldered and moving confidently, a length of rebar in one hand, eyes adjusting to the interior dark. He scanned the garage. He found Nathan standing in the center of the floor, hands at his sides, completely still. "There he is," the man said, and there was something almost cheerful in his voice, the casualness of someone who had done this enough times that it had stopped feeling serious. He stepped further in, and the others came through behind him, fanning out the way people who've been in a few situations like this do without being told to, spreading the angles, covering the space. Nathan counted as they entered. 8, 9, 10, 11, all in. He looked at the side door behind them. Then he walked to it deliberately and pushed it shut and slid the lower bolt, the one still working, into its bracket. Several of the men exchanged glances. "What are you doing?" the heavy-shouldered man said. "Keeping this contained," Nathan said. His voice came out even and quiet, which he'd always found made people more uncomfortable than yelling did. "You think that's smart? There's 11 of us." "I know," Nathan said. "I counted twice." He looked at the monitor on the south wall, confirmed the recording indicator was still red, then turned back to the 11 men standing in his garage among the cars he'd spent years restoring, among the tools his father had handed down to him, under the lights his grandfather had once wired into what used to be a fish shed near a waterfront, that apparently someone had decided was worth more than his family's 6 decades of standing on it. "I've been waiting for you to send enough," Nathan said. "Tonight you finally did." The heavy-shouldered man started forward. Nathan moved. What happened in the next 12 minutes would be captured in clean, high-definition clarity on 4 cameras simultaneously, and when the federal investigator Maya Bennett later reviewed the footage, she would watch it 3 times in full before saying anything. And what she finally said, quietly, to the colleague sitting beside her, was, "This man has been very angry for a very long time and has been very careful about when he let it out." The men came at him the way groups like that always did. Not organized, not trained, but numerous and energized by the assumption of advantage. They telegraphed. They committed their weight before they'd identified the target point. They were used to situations that were already over before they started. Nathan didn't fight like someone trying to hurt people. He fought like someone trying to make sure nobody got back up fast enough to be a problem while he moved to the next one. The rebar went first, redirected rather than blocked. The man holding it suddenly off balance and finding the concrete floor with his face before he entirely understood what had happened. The next man got a forearm across the throat that shut down his participation immediately. Nathan moved through the space between them with an economy of motion that looked on the footage almost like he was walking somewhere he was already familiar with. No wasted steps, no dramatic pauses, just a man doing an extremely serious job with the minimum effort required to do it correctly. By the 4th minute, 4 men were down and not getting back up quickly. By the 8th minute, 2 more had made the decision to stop trying and were sitting against the east wall breathing carefully. The remaining 5 came at once, which he'd expected. It was always the remaining ones who came at once, because it was the only strategic adjustment available to them. And that part was harder and more painful and left Nathan with a torn sleeve, a cut above his left eyebrow that was bleeding steadily onto his cheek, and a bruised rib that he wouldn't fully register for another hour. But he was standing. 11 men, and he was the one standing. He picked up his phone from where it had slid near the tool cart and checked the recording. Still running. All 4 feeds, clean and clear. He walked to the intercom on the wall and pressed the button. 3 knocks, Lil. He climbed the stairs. He knocked 3 times. The door opened and Lily stood there in her pajamas and socks, and she looked at his face. The blood, the torn sleeve, the way he was holding his left side. And she didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at him. "It's done," Nathan said. "Like done?" she asked. He put his hand on the side of her head, the way he'd done since she was small, and she leaned into it slightly, even though she was too old for that kind of thing, and had told him so on multiple occasions. "Getting there," he said. Downstairs, somewhere in the dark of the garage, one of the men moaned and then went quiet again. Nathan went to the bathroom sink and ran cold water over his face and looked at himself in the mirror for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone and dialed Maya Bennett's number. She picked up on the 2nd ring. "I've got something for you to come see," he said. Maya Bennett arrived at 40 minutes past 1 in the morning, which was faster than Nathan had expected given that she lived across town and he hadn't given her much warning. She came in a plain gray sedan, no lights, no sirens, and when she walked through the side door of the garage, she stopped just inside the threshold and stood very still for a moment, taking in the scene the way certain people do. Not with shock, but with a kind of rapid, systematic intake, her eyes moving across the room in a pattern that Nathan recognized as professional habit. 11 men, most of them sitting upright against the walls now, some nursing specific injuries with the careful attention of people cataloging damage. 2 were still horizontal near the center of the floor, but breathing visibly. All of them had been zip-tied at the wrists. Nathan had a box of heavy-duty ones from the hardware store, purchased 3 weeks ago, which had earned him a mildly strange look from the cashier that he hadn't bothered explaining. Maya was 34. Built compact and efficient-looking in the way of someone who spent real time staying functional rather than just looking like it. She had dark hair pulled back without much ceremony, a jacket she'd clearly grabbed on her way out the door, and the particular expression of someone trying very hard not to let their face say something their professional position didn't yet allow them to confirm. She looked at the 11 men. She looked at Nathan, who was standing near the workbench with a dish towel pressed to the cut above his eyebrow. She looked at the cameras on the walls. "All of that is recorded," Nathan said. "I see the cameras." "Real-time upload. You've already got a copy in the shared drive I set up." She looked at him for a moment. "You set up a shared drive?" 3 weeks ago. I sent you the access link. You said you'd look at it when you had time. I haven't had time. You've got time now. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. While she did, Nathan walked to the south wall and sat down on an overturned crate because his ribs had progressed from dull background noise to something more insistent, and standing wasn't improving the situation. One of the men against the east wall, mid-30s, a jaw that had been on the losing end of something in the past hour, was watching Nathan with an expression that had moved through several phases since the fighting stopped. It had started as disbelief, migrated through something like humiliation, and arrived at a flat, calculating watchfulness that Nathan didn't like as much as the others. "You know what you just did," the man said. It wasn't quite a question. Nathan looked at him. "You just made this a lot worse for yourself. The people running this operation, they're not going to leave you standing after tonight." "They haven't managed it in 27 tries," Nathan said. The man's jaw tightened. "This is different." "You're right," Nathan said. "It is." He looked at the camera on the south wall, the red recording indicator still burning steadily in the dark. "It's very different now," he said. The next 4 hours were procedural and exhausting in the way that interactions with law enforcement always were when you were the person who'd left 11 people on your garage floor. Maya had brought 2 colleagues, a younger man named Reston, who photographed everything twice, and a woman named Khalil, who spent 40 minutes with each of the 11 separately, in the small office off the main bay, asking questions in a voice too low for Nathan to hear from where he sat. Nathan gave his statement twice. He was thorough and specific and kept his language flat and factual, which was something the military had been good training for. The after-action report, stripped of drama, just sequence and detail. At some point, a paramedic looked at the cut on his eyebrow and told him it needed 3 stitches, and he said he'd deal with it later, and she gave him the look that paramedics give people who say that, taped it closed, and moved on. Lily came downstairs at around 3 a.m., despite explicit instructions, found the garage populated with law enforcement and 11 damaged strangers, and assessed the situation with the specific brand of quiet judgment that she'd developed over the past year of watching her father refuse to be pushed off his own property. She didn't ask questions. She went to the small office, found a folding chair, sat in it, and went back to sleep sitting upright, which was a skill Nathan had never possessed, and which she had apparently inherited from her mother. It was nearly 5 a.m. by the time the last of the 11 had been transported and the crime scene documentation was done, and Maya sat across from Nathan at the small table in the office where Lily had been sleeping. Lily had migrated to the parts room couch sometime around 4, with 2 cups of coffee that tasted like they'd been made in a machine that hadn't been cleaned since the previous administration. "I need to tell you something," Maya said. "Okay. And I need you to understand that what I'm about to say is in the context of an ongoing federal investigation that technically you're not supposed to know exists." Nathan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "All right. The Ashbourne Crown Waterfront project has been on our radar for 8 months. She paused. "Not because of what they're building, because of what's underneath where they want to build it." Nathan was quiet for a moment. The cut above his eyebrow throbbed. "The contamination," he said. Maya's expression shifted in a way that was very small, but very readable, the particular adjustment of someone recalibrating how much they need to explain. "You know about that." "Claire knew about it," Nathan said. "My wife. She worked for an environmental consulting firm before she got sick. She didn't tell me everything before she died. I think she didn't want me to do anything until I understood the whole picture. She left me documents." "What kind of documents?" Nathan looked at her steadily. "The kind that tell you what's under the ground at the north end of the Ashbourne Crown Acquisition Corridor. The kind that tell you the contamination assessment was conducted and the results were buried. And the kind that tell you at least 2 people signed off on a report saying the land was clean when they knew it wasn't." Maya set her coffee cup down carefully. "Nathan, do you still have those documents? That's what they keep coming here for." She was quiet for a long moment. Somewhere outside, the first gray suggestion of morning was starting to separate the sky from the waterfront. "I need to see them," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I called you instead of somebody else." "Well, The documents were in a fireproof lockbox mounted behind the false back panel of the parts room closet, a modification Nathan had made 6 months ago after the third attempted break-in, during which someone had gotten as far as the office before the alarm system he'd installed himself ran them off. He retrieved the box, opened it with the key he kept on his person, and spread the contents across the work table. There were 43 pages in total. Some were photocopies, some originals. 2 were printed from digital sources and annotated in Claire's precise handwriting in blue ink. The handwriting of someone trained in technical notation, small and exact with subscript numbers and margin notes that cross-reference specific passages. Maya went through them methodically, not rushing. Nathan sat nearby and drank his terrible coffee and watched her face. Claire had worked for an environmental consultancy called Meridian Assessment Group until 3 years before her death. Her specialty had been contamination analysis, industrial site surveys, legacy waste mapping, the complicated forensic work of figuring out what the ground under a given piece of land was hiding and what it would cost to make it safe. She was good at it. She'd told Nathan once, early in their relationship, that the work felt important in a specific way that was hard to explain to people who didn't do it. That somewhere under a lot of cities, beneath parking lots and playgrounds and future apartment complexes, there were pockets of the industrial past sitting in the soil, slowly moving through the water table, and someone had to be the person who went looking. What Claire had found, in the final year she worked at Meridian, was that someone had hired the firm to conduct an assessment of a large land parcel at the north end of Belhaven's waterfront district. The parcel had previously been used for decades as a secondary processing and storage site for a chemical manufacturing operation that had closed in the early 90s. The kind of legacy contamination that those sites left behind was well documented and serious, not immediately catastrophic, but the sort of thing that required proper remediation before any residential or commercial development could responsibly proceed. The assessment Claire's team conducted found significant contamination. PCE, TCE, trace heavy metals in the groundwater, some soil saturation in the eastern quadrant that would require excavation and treatment before construction. The report they were instructed to file said the land was clean. Claire had not filed that report. She had refused. She had been told the refusal would affect her position at the firm. She had said she understood. She had been let go 3 months later, officially for restructuring reasons, unofficially for reasons everyone involved understood clearly. But before she left, she had taken copies. Everything. The original findings, the methodology documentation, the internal communications in which she could be seen escalating her concerns and the responses she received, and most critically, a chain of emails between 2 senior figures at Meridian and a representative of Ashbourne Crown Development, in which the substance of the falsified report was discussed with a directness that Claire's margin notes described in her careful technical handwriting as remarkably stupid of them to put in writing. Claire had been sick for 8 months by the time she gave Nathan the documents. She'd held on to them for over a year before that, not entirely sure what to do with them, not wanting to move too fast and expose herself to legal risk without having the full picture. She ran out of time to get the full picture. Nathan had spent 14 months trying to finish what she started. This email chain, Maya said, setting 3 pages side by side on the table and tapping them with her finger. The representative from Ashbourne Crown, the one she calls RD in her notes. Do you know who that is? I've got a strong guess, Nathan said. Tell me. Richard Dahl. He's listed as Vice President of Site Acquisition on the Ashbourne Crown website. He's been VP of Site Acquisition since the company was restructured about 4 years ago. Maya looked at the emails again. The sender email had a domain that predated the current company structure, and the name attached to it was a truncated display format that could plausibly map to several names. But the content, specific references to the Belhaven parcel, the phrase "our friends at Meridian have been cooperative," a timeline that matched precisely with the falsified report, pointed hard. This is significant, she said. I know it's significant. I mean, she stopped, reorganized. Nathan, this isn't just about your property. If this contamination assessment was buried and Ashbourne Crown proceeds with development on this land, you're talking about residential buildings going up over a seriously compromised water table, You're talking about people living there long term, children. I know, he said. Claire knew. That's why she kept the documents. Not to protect herself. She was past protecting herself by then. She kept them because she believed someone would eventually do something with them. There was a specific quality to that sentence that landed in the small office and stayed there. Maya looked at the pages in front of her. She looked at Nathan. She looked at the cut on his eyebrow, taped shut and slightly swollen now, and at his hands around the coffee cup, the knuckles of his right hand scraped raw and already beginning to color. You've been sitting on this for 14 months, she said. I've been building the case for 14 months, he said. There's a difference. I needed to understand the full chain. Who knew? Who authorized? Who gave the order to start pressuring property owners who wouldn't sell? I needed the harassment documented. I needed it all connected. Tonight was part of that. Tonight was the last piece I was waiting for, he said. 11 men on camera breaking into my property. After 26 prior incidents I can document, after letters that escalated in a clear pattern, after threats that specifically referenced documents they wanted retrieved. He paused. After someone specifically mentioned what my wife left me. Maya was quiet. That last part, Nathan said. When the man outside said what he said tonight, about the files, about what my wife left me, that's not something a random crew of hired muscle knows. Someone told them exactly what to look for. Which means someone inside the operation knows what Claire found, and has known for a while, and has been trying to get it back quietly before it became a federal problem. Nathan set down the coffee cup. I think they've been moving carefully because they don't want Victoria Ashford to know. Maya's eyes sharpened slightly. The CEO, he said. I've been watching her public statements, the press materials for the waterfront project. She's been talking about community benefit, environmental responsibility, long-term sustainable development. Either she's the best liar I've ever seen, or she genuinely doesn't know what's in her company's foundation. That's a significant distinction, Maya said. It is, Nathan agreed. Because if she doesn't know, then what we have is someone using her name and her company to run an operation she hasn't authorized, someone who's been making decisions about contamination cover-ups and property intimidation and sending 11 men to a mechanic's garage in the middle of the night, all under the umbrella of a corporation whose public face has no idea it's happening. Maya was already reaching for her notebook. I need copies of everything in this box, she said. There's a copier in the office. And I need you to walk me through every incident from the beginning, every one you can document. I've got a log, Nathan said. Dates, times, descriptions, any evidence I collected. I started it after the second incident. He stood, and his ribs reminded him firmly of their opinion of that decision, and he moved more carefully toward the office door. It's organized. Of course it is, Maya said, in a tone that wasn't quite sarcasm and wasn't quite admiration, and landed somewhere in between. Sat. They worked through the morning. Lily woke up around 7 and made toast and brought 2 plates out to the table without being asked, which Nathan registered but didn't comment on, because commenting on it would have required him to use a tone of voice he wasn't sure he had access to right now. She looked at the documents spread across the table with the particular expression of someone who understood more than they were supposed to about the situation they were living inside. Is it bad stuff? She asked. It's important stuff, Nathan said. She absorbed that. Are we going to have to move? No. She nodded once, picked up her toast, and went back to the couch in the parts room. Maya watched her go. How much does she know? Enough, Nathan said. Not everything. She knows people keep coming to the garage and that I keep not leaving, and that it's connected to something her mom found out before she died. He picked up a page from the stack. She's smart. She's figured out some of it herself. She doing okay? Nathan considered the question with the kind of honesty he only applied when he was tired enough that the usual filters had dropped a little. She's doing better than she should be, he said. I don't know if that's a good thing. Maya didn't offer a reassurance, which Nathan appreciated. Empty reassurances were something he'd run out of patience for somewhere in the middle of the first year after Claire. By mid-morning, Maya had digital copies of everything and had made 3 more calls on her phone, stepping outside to the lot for privacy. When she came back in the last time, something had changed in her posture. Not dramatically, but Nathan was good at reading people, and what he saw was the shift of someone who had just received information that confirmed something they'd hoped to confirm. "The men from last night," she said, "were getting IDs. The two with previous federal flags. They connect to a private security contractor called Harwick Vanguard Solutions. HVS has done work for several development companies in the region. Legitimate stuff, mostly. But there's a name that keeps coming up when you start looking at their less documented work." She showed him her notebook. The name was Richard Dahl. Nathan looked at it for a long moment. "Same name," he said. "Same name," she confirmed, "which puts him not just in the email chain your wife documented, but as a direct operational link to the crews that have been hitting your property. He's been running this himself. Looks that way. And the question is whether he's doing it with knowledge and authorization from above him, or whether he's been running it independently, using the company's resources without full executive knowledge." "You mean whether Victoria Ashford knows," Nathan said. "Whether Victoria Ashford knows," Maya confirmed. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Through the open door of the parts room, he could hear the faint sound of Lily's music, something she played from her phone, too quiet to identify. Just a texture of sound in the background of the morning. "I want to be clear about something," he said. "Go ahead." "Whatever Ashbourne Crown CEO knows or doesn't know, that doesn't change the contamination. It doesn't change the falsified report. It doesn't change what's in the ground north of here or what would happen to people if construction goes through without proper remediation." "Agreed. So I don't care particularly about protecting her or making this easier for her. What I care about is that the contamination gets addressed, the people who falsified the assessment get held accountable, and whatever's been funding 27 attacks on my property gets shut down." "Those things aren't mutually exclusive with her not knowing," Maya said. "No," Nathan said. "They're not. I just want to be clear about the priority." Maya nodded. "I have to make contact with her." "I know." "She's going to find out about last night. If I don't get to her first, Dahl will, and he'll control what she hears." "I know," Nathan said again. "You want to be there?" He looked around the garage, the south wall camera, the tool cart, the Camaro with its hood still up from the previous evening, the work he'd been pretending to do before everything started. His father's tools on the pegboard, organized in the same arrangement they'd always been in, the outline of each one traced in black marker so you could see at a glance what was missing. "Not yet," he said. "Let her hear it from you first. Let her process it. Then we'll see." Maya gathered her copies, stacked them into the case she'd brought in, and zipped it closed. She stood up and rolled her neck once, the gesture of someone who'd been awake too long and was acknowledging it without conceding to it. "The men from last night, I'm recommending they be held on federal obstruction charges while we build out the full picture," she said. "That buys us time before anyone in the operation knows exactly how much we've got." "How much time?" 48 hours, maybe 72. After that, someone starts making calls and the picture starts to move. Nathan nodded. "Don't go anywhere," she said. "I never do," he said. She left through the side door. He listened to her car start in the lot and pull out and fade down the street, and then the garage was quiet, except for Lily's music and the sound of the waterfront district waking up outside, the early truck traffic, and the first gulls off the water making their particular complaints against the morning. Nathan looked at the space where Maya had spread the documents across the table. The table was clear now, the originals back in the lockbox, the box back in the closet. The garage looked almost normal, if you didn't look too carefully at the scuff marks on the floor near the center bay, the bent bracket on the side door frame, or the small dark stain near the east shelving unit that Nathan was going to have to deal with at some point. He thought about Claire's handwriting, the precision of it, the way her margin notes said remarkably stupid of them to put in writing in the exact same tone she'd used when pointing out a similar thing in a news story they'd read together years ago, curled up on the couch on a Sunday morning, her commentary running alongside his reading like a second channel of information that he had somehow never learned to do without. He pressed the heel of his hand against the tape over his eyebrow, checking the pressure. Still holding. He had 48 hours, maybe 72. He went to make better coffee. The better coffee helped, but not enough. Nathan sat at the work table for a while after Maya left, running numbers in his head. Not math exactly, more like the kind of calculation that didn't have clean variables. How long before someone in the Ashbourne Crown operation realized their crew hadn't reported back? How long before Richard Dahl started making calls? How long before those calls confirmed what he'd sent into Nathan's garage? The previous night had not accomplished what it was supposed to accomplish. And how long after that before Dahl did the specific kind of thinking that a man in his position would do when the quiet approach had definitively failed? The answers he kept arriving at were all shorter than 48 hours. He called his attorney in Harwick at 8:15, got voicemail, left a message that was brief and specific and contained the phrase, "Last night escalated significantly," in a tone that he hoped communicated the appropriate weight without alarming whoever might happen to hear it. Then he went upstairs, changed his shirt, looked at the taped cut in the bathroom mirror again, decided it was fine, and came back down to find Lily standing in the kitchen area of the small apartment above the garage making eggs. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know I don't have to." She didn't turn around. "Sit down. You've got a look." "What look?" "The look where you're about to tell me everything is fine, when what you mean is that everything is complicated and you're thinking hard about it." Nathan sat down at the small kitchen table. It had 4 chairs, which was 2 more than they ever used, and it always had 4 chairs, and Nathan had never moved the extra 2 because moving them had felt, at some point he couldn't precisely identify, like a decision he wasn't ready to make. Lily set a plate in front of him. The eggs were slightly overcooked, the way she always made them because she got distracted, and there was too much pepper, which was how she liked them, rather than how he did, and he picked up the fork without saying anything about either of those things. "School?" he said. "It's Saturday, Dad." He'd lost track of the days. That happened when he went too many hours without sleep. The calendar got slippery. "Right." She sat across from him with her own plate. She ate for a while without talking, which was something she'd gotten better at over the past year and a half. The comfortable silence, the not filling every gap. Claire had been the same way. The observation arrived, and then Nathan put it somewhere and ate his eggs. "The woman who was here," Lily said eventually. "Maya, she's federal?" "Yes." "Are we in trouble?" "The people who keep coming to the garage are in trouble," he said. "We're on the right side of this." She considered that. "You're sure?" "Yes." "Okay." She pushed a piece of egg around her plate. "Mom would have known what to do, like she'd have had a plan already." Nathan looked at his daughter. The morning light from the small window over the sink caught the side of her face, and she looked younger than 11, and also somehow older, and he didn't know what to do with that particular combination. "Your mom had the plan," he said. "She started it. I'm finishing it." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded once and went back to eating. It wasn't a happy nod. It was the nod of someone absorbing something that didn't feel like enough, but was going to have to be. Victoria Ashford's morning had started 3 hours earlier than usual, which was saying something because her usual start time was already unreasonable by any normal standard. She'd been at her desk by 5:30, working through site timeline projections for the Belhaven corridor, when the first call came from her head of legal. Then a second call from the project manager on the north parcel. Then, 12 minutes after that, a call from a number she didn't immediately recognize, which turned out to be a federal investigator named Maya Bennett, who said she needed to meet that morning and that it was not optional, and that Victoria would benefit significantly from hearing what she had to say before she heard it from anyone else. Victoria had canceled her 8 o'clock, her 9 o'clock, and the 11 a.m. site walk she'd had on the calendar for 2 weeks. She met Maya at a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown office building that belonged to a law firm she had no connection to, which had been Maya's specific request, and which Victoria had processed in the car over as a signal worth paying attention to. When you were asked to meet somewhere that wasn't your office, and wasn't a government building, and wasn't anywhere a person might naturally associate with your organization, the subtext was usually that the conversation was about your organization. She'd brought her personal attorney, a woman named Price, who sat beside her and said very little and mostly listened with the stillness of someone running legal risk calculations in real time. Maya laid it out with a directness that Victoria found simultaneously difficult and somewhat easier than the alternative would have been. The contamination assessment. The falsified report. The email chain that connected a Meridian Assessment Group senior associate to a representative of Ashbourne Crown identified as RD. The timeline of property acquisition pressure in the Belhaven corridor. The 27 documented incidents of harassment and property damage targeting Nathan Cole's garage. The 11 men, the cameras, the prior night. Victoria sat through all of it without interrupting, which cost her more than it probably appeared to cost her. She had a particular quality that had served her well in business, the ability to receive bad information without letting her face become a problem. It wasn't coldness, it was control. Inside, behind that controlled expression, things were happening in rapid, unpleasant sequence. The RD in the email chain, she said when Maya finished. You believe that's Richard Dahl. The content of the emails, the timeline, the connection to the HVS contractor that provided the personnel from last night. Yes, we believe it's Richard Dahl. Victoria looked at the copy of the email chain that Maya had laid in front of her. She read the relevant sections twice. Her attorney put a hand lightly on her arm, which was the signal for you don't have to respond to this right now, and Victoria moved her arm slightly, which was her signal back for, I understand, but I'm going to. I need to ask you something directly, Victoria said. Go ahead. Is there any part of this investigation that considers me a knowing participant in what you've described? Maya held her gaze steadily. At this moment, based on what we have, the operational chain we've identified runs through Dahl and does not extend to your level with documentary evidence. That assessment is current as of this morning and subject to change as the investigation develops. It was a careful answer. Victoria appreciated careful answers because she gave them herself and knew exactly how much work went into constructing them. Which means, Victoria said, that I have a window. A window to do what you do with it, Maya said. Yes. Price was writing something on her notepad, not looking up. Victoria sat back in her chair. She was 30 years old, which still surprised some people in rooms like this. The expectation of someone older, more weathered, more visibly seasoned behind the title. She'd taken over Ashbourne Crown at 27 after her predecessor had stepped down under circumstances that were publicly described as health-related and privately understood as something more complicated, and she had spent the subsequent 3 years trying to build the company into something she could be genuinely proud of. The Belhaven waterfront project had been her signature initiative, her vision for what the corridor could become. She'd given it in speeches, in presentations to the city council, in interviews with local press, a renewed waterfront, responsible development, something that would last. The idea that it had been built from somewhere underneath her, on a foundation of buried reports and intimidated property owners and apparently criminal harassment campaigns conducted through private contractors. That idea was sitting in the room with her like something with physical weight. The contamination, she said. It's significant, Maya said, meaning if construction proceeds on the northern parcel as currently planned, meaning people would eventually be living and working above a groundwater contamination issue that was documented, suppressed, and knowingly omitted from the site assessment your company relied on to proceed. Victoria was quiet. I want to see the full documentation, she said finally. Everything the investigator, the woman who collected this, Nathan Cole's wife, everything she compiled. I can facilitate that, Maya said. There are some procedural steps. Facilitate them. She stood. And I want to speak with Nathan Cole. Maya looked at her carefully. That's, not a request, Victoria said. I understand the investigation has its own structure. I'm not asking to compromise anything. I want to look at the man whose property my company has been systematically trying to destroy, and I want him to hear from me directly that I didn't know, and I want to see whether he believes me. There was a beat. I'll make a call, Maya said. Tab. Nathan got the call at 12:45. He was in the garage working on the Camaro. Actually working this time, not pretending, because the ribs hurt less when he was moving, and the movement helped with the other thing, the restless, over-caffeinated vigilance that had been running since the previous night without a clear off switch. She wants to meet you, Maya said. Already? She processed it fast. I don't know if that's a good sign or a red flag, and I'm genuinely not sure which one to be hoping for. What's your read on her? A pause. Honest read? I think she's furious and embarrassed and trying to figure out how to do the right thing in a situation where the right thing is going to cost her significantly, which could make her an asset or it could make her unpredictable. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Nathan said. No, Maya agreed. They're not. You want to do it? He looked at the Camaro. His father had started this restoration, brought it in as a basket case, a vehicle someone had pulled from a flooded barn upstate, and started the slow, patient work of bringing it back. He'd never finished it. Nathan had been finishing it slowly for 4 years. Set it up, he said. They met that afternoon at the garage, which had been Nathan's condition when Maya relayed the options. Not a conference room downtown, not somewhere neutral, not somewhere that erased the context. The garage, where it had all been happening. Victoria Ashford arrived in a car driven by someone else, which was the first thing Nathan noticed. She hadn't brought a team, just a driver and her attorney, who waited in the car. She came in through the side door, the same door they'd kicked in the night before, and Nathan had not repaired the frame yet on purpose, and she saw the damaged bracket and the bent metal, and she registered it, he watched her register it, and she didn't look away from it the way people sometimes did from damage they'd rather not acknowledge. She was shorter than he'd expected from the photographs. Not short exactly, but somewhere in the zone between average and petite that photographs from speaking engagements tended to flatten out. She was put together in the way of someone who'd come from a serious meeting and hadn't had time to recalibrate. Clothes that were right for a boardroom, slightly incongruous in a space that smelled like motor oil and grinding metal. She looked at the garage the way Maya had looked at it the previous night, that rapid, systematic intake, except where Maya's gaze had been cataloging an incident scene, Victoria's was cataloging something more personal and more uncomfortable. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Miss Ashford." They looked at each other for a moment. Neither of them filled the pause with something unnecessary, which Nathan counted as something. Maya stood to one side near the workbench, not quite present in the conversation and not quite absent from it. "I need to say something to you, and I'd like to say it without lawyers in the room," Victoria said. "Your attorney's in the car," Nathan said. "Mine is in Harwick. We're as close to without lawyers as we're likely to get." Something moved in her expression that might have been a fractional acknowledgement of the irony. "I didn't know," she said. "Okay. I'm not asking you to accept that. I understand why you wouldn't. I'm telling you because it's true, and because I think you're owed the direct statement before anything else gets said." Nathan looked at her steadily. He'd had extensive training in reading the difference between someone performing sincerity and someone in actual possession of it. Not a foolproof skill, nobody had that, but a developed one. She was standing in the middle of his garage, no security, no corporate backdrop, with the damaged door frame 8 feet to her left, and her face had the particular quality of someone who hadn't fully assembled their composure yet after something that had genuinely disassembled it. "How much do you know now?" he said. "The emails, the contamination documents, the incidents against your property. I was given a summary." She stopped. 27 times. 27 times, Nathan confirmed. And Dahl authorized all of it. That's what the evidence suggests. Victoria looked at the south wall camera, still mounted there, still pointed at the center of the garage floor. "How long have those been up?" 6 weeks. "You planned last night." "I planned to have everything documented when the right moment came," he said. "I didn't plan the specific number of men." She looked back at him. "Did you know, before last night, that Dahl was specifically involved?" "I had a strong working theory," Nathan said. "The communication device one of the men from last night had on him. The orders log in it confirmed the chain, the voice on the authorization recording, the phone number in the contact list. It was enough." Maya had retrieved that device in the immediate aftermath. Nathan had handed it over voluntarily as part of demonstrating to any skeptical viewer of the footage that he was in cooperation mode, not obstruction mode. It had been one of the cleanest pieces of the evidence chain, the kind of thing that made federal investigators visibly relieved. "I want to ask you something," Nathan said. "Ask. The project, the waterfront development, how much of the Northern Parcels site assessment did you personally review?" She was quiet for a moment. "The summary documentation, The findings summary, the regulatory compliance checklist, the certification of site clearance, standard executive review of materials prepared by the site team. She paused. Which means I reviewed a document that accurately summarized a report that did not accurately reflect the actual findings. Yes. I was given a clean result by people I trusted to produce a clean result because the result was clean. You were given a falsified result by people who ensured the result said what certain parties needed it to say, Nathan said. Those aren't the same thing, but the outcome is the same. If construction had proceeded on that northern parcel as planned, people would have eventually been living on top of a contamination site that your company told the city was safe. Victoria absorbed that. She didn't argue with it. What do you need from me? She said. The directness of it was unexpected enough that Nathan took a moment. The investigation needs your full cooperation. That means everything. Internal communications, contract documentation, the full vendor relationship with HVS, any conversations you had with Dahl about the Belhaven corridor that touched on property acquisition or resistance from owners. You'll have all of it. It also means you need to be prepared for what comes out of that, Nathan said. This isn't going to end quietly. The contamination story alone is going to be significant when it becomes public. The harassment campaign on top of that, the falsified environmental report, the criminal contractor operation. This is going to be a significant story. I know what it is, she said. I've been sitting with it for the last 5 hours. And? She looked at him with an expression that had moved through several phases during the conversation and arrived somewhere tired and specific. And I built this project to do something real for this city. I know how that sounds right now. I know it sounds like exactly what someone in my position would say, but the contamination gets addressed, properly, fully, at the company's expense. The falsified report gets corrected in the public record. The people who ran this operation answer for what they did. She stopped. And your property stays yours. I'll put that in writing today if you want it in writing. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. I don't need it in writing, he said. I need it to actually happen. Then we have the same interest, she said. It wasn't a comfortable truce. It wasn't the kind of moment that resolved anything cleanly or made anyone feel particularly good about the road behind them. It was just two people standing in a damaged garage in the middle of the afternoon, both of them clear-eyed about a situation that was ugly and complicated and not getting simpler anytime soon, arriving at a shared direction forward because the alternative was worse. Maya, near the workbench, made a note in her notebook. What Nathan hadn't mentioned to Victoria, and what Maya had agreed, provisionally and with stated reservations, to hold back from the formal disclosure chain for the next 24 hours, was the secondary piece of what the communication device had revealed. The orders log contained 3 months of abbreviated communications, time-stamped and organized by operation. The Belhaven garage operations were there, clearly labeled in a shorthand that wasn't difficult to decode, but threaded through the same log with overlapping timestamps and the same authorization signature were references to 3 other property addresses in Belhaven's waterfront corridor that Nathan didn't recognize. He'd cross-referenced them that morning, sitting at the work table with his laptop, while Lily was upstairs and Maya was still on site. All 3 addresses were small businesses, a print shop, a dry cleaning operation that had been in the same family for 30 years, a marine supply store whose owner Nathan knew by sight, a man in his 60s named Gerald, who went to the same hardware store Nathan went to on Saturday mornings and always had strong opinions about caulking guns. All 3 had sold their properties to Ashbourne Crown in the past 18 months. All 3 had reported incidents of property damage or threats to the Belhaven Police Department in the period before their sales, according to the public incident reports Nathan had pulled. None of those reports had resulted in visible action. He'd sat with that information for a while, understanding what it meant in terms of the scale of what Dahl had been operating and the duration for which it had been running, and the number of people who had already been pushed out of the corridor that Nathan was still standing in. People who hadn't had the specific combination of military training, embedded evidence, patience, and specific personal fury that had allowed Nathan to still be there. He thought about the print shop. He thought about Gerald and the marine supply store. He thought about Claire's voice on the recording she'd made for him, The one she'd recorded 3 weeks before she died because she'd known by then that she wouldn't be there to explain things herself, sitting up in the hospital bed with her phone propped on the meal tray, talking with the careful, deliberate precision of someone who understood they were saying something that needed to last. The reason I kept these documents, Nathan, isn't because I'm brave. It's because the alternative was knowing what's in the ground up there and knowing what it would eventually do to people and not doing anything about it. I'm not capable of that. Neither are you. That's one of the things I've always known about you. He'd listened to that recording more times than he would admit to anyone. He brought the secondary information to Maya that afternoon before Victoria arrived, and Maya had looked at the 3 addresses and the communications log cross-reference and said, quietly but with genuine feeling, "This is bigger than your property." "I know," Nathan said. "Dahl has been running this corridor acquisition operation for at least 2 years. Multiple properties, multiple harassment campaigns, one connected contractor network, and at least one falsified environmental assessment, possibly more," Nathan said. "I only have documentation for the coal parcel because that's what Claire was working on. But if Meridian Assessment Group was willing to bury findings once, the question worth asking is whether that was a one-time accommodation or an established working relationship." Maya had looked at him with an expression he was becoming familiar with, the expression of someone recalibrating upward how much work they had in front of them. "I need to make more calls," she said. "You've been saying that all morning." "The number keeps going up," she said. By late afternoon, the garage had returned to something resembling its usual state. Nathan had cleaned the floor, reattached what he could of the side door frame with what he had on hand, and spent an hour on the Camaro because it needed doing and because the work was grounding in a way that nothing else had been over the past 18 hours. His ribs were a consistent, clarifying discomfort. Not bad enough to significantly limit function, bad enough to provide a running commentary on the previous night that he was finding, against his general preferences, somewhat useful. It kept him honest about the cost of things. Lily came down at 4 and sat on the rolling stool she always used when she came into the garage, the one her mother had used, and watched him work for a while without saying anything. "Do you think it's almost over?" she said eventually. Nathan considered the question seriously, the way she'd asked it, not the child's version of the question, which was about reassurance, but the actual question, which was about his genuine assessment. "Getting closer," he said. "There are still some pieces that need to fall into place. But you know what the pieces are. Most of them." She was quiet, turning the stool slightly back and forth, a habit she'd had since she was small. "I keep thinking about Mom," she said. "Like, she started this, right? She was the one who found the stuff and kept it, and she didn't live to see it become anything." Nathan set down the tool he was holding. "She knew it would become something," he said. "She just knew she wasn't going to be here for the part where it did." Lily absorbed that. The stool turned slowly. "That's really sad," she said. "Yeah," Nathan said. "It is." He picked up the tool again. The Camaro's engine bay waited, patient and mechanical, and entirely indifferent to the weight of everything happening around it, which was, Nathan had come to understand over years of this work, more or less the point of it. Outside, the waterfront light was doing the particular thing it did on late afternoons in Belle Haven, going gold and low and catching the water between the dock structures in a way that made the industrial end of the harbor look, briefly and deceptively, like somewhere that had always been beautiful. Nathan had grown up watching that light from this building. He expected he'd keep watching it. His phone buzzed on the workbench, a text from Maya. "Dahl is aware of last night. He's moving. We need to talk tonight." He read it once, set the phone down, and kept working. He had expected this. 48 hours had been optimistic. Dahl was smart enough to understand that 11 men disappearing into federal custody in a single night meant the situation had changed irreversibly, and smart enough to understand that the response to that could not be slow. Which meant Nathan now had a different kind of problem, not the problem of waiting for the next attack. That phase was done. The problem now was that Dahl was going to do what cornered men with resources and no clean exit did. He was going to try to control the narrative, neutralize the evidence, and find a way to make the story about something other than what it was. And Nathan needed to make sure that when Dahl made that move, He made it somewhere that Nathan was already waiting. He looked at the south wall camera. He looked at the center of the garage floor, the space that had been, less than 20 hours ago, the place where 27 attempts to remove him had finally produced the result he'd been building toward for 7 months. There was one more thing that needed to happen. One more piece that the communications log had suggested and that the afternoon's conversation with Victoria had half confirmed and that Maya's text had now made urgent. Dahl needed to come here himself, not a crew, not a contractor. Dahl. And Nathan was going to have to give him a reason to. The plan had 3 problems, and Nathan identified all 3 of them before Maya arrived that evening. The first problem was bait. Getting Dahl to come to the garage himself, not send another crew, not work through intermediaries, but physically show up, required giving him something he couldn't get any other way. The 11 men from the previous night were in federal custody and not talking, or talking in the limited, strategic way that people talked when they had attorneys and were trying to calculate their exposure. Dahl would know the communications device was gone. He would assume, correctly, that its contents were now in federal hands. What he wouldn't know with certainty was exactly how much of the contamination documentation Nathan still had on site, or whether the originals, Claire's originals, with her handwriting, which carried a different evidentiary weight than copies, were still in the building. That uncertainty was the lever. The second problem was timing. Dahl was moving according to Maya's text, which meant he was already in the process of making decisions. A man like Dahl, cornered, with resources and a clear understanding of his exposure, would not stay in motion in an open-ended way. He would consolidate quickly and then either go to ground or go on offense. The window in which he was still operational and reachable was narrow. The third problem was the police. When Maya arrived at 7 that evening, Nathan already had coffee ready that was actually good this time, and he walked her through all 3 problems in the order he'd identified them, which was not the order of severity, but the order in which they needed to be solved because each one depended on the previous. She listened without interrupting, which he'd come to appreciate about her. A lot of people listened in a way that was really just waiting for a gap to put their own thinking into. Maya listened like she was actually building something from what she heard. "The police problem," she said when he finished. "Tell me more about that." The communications log on the device from last night, there was a contact entry. The abbreviation was CPD-M, which I read as Bellhaven Police Department Modified, not the department generally, someone specific. He set down his coffee. There were 3 entries in the log where that contact appears alongside the Bellhaven garage operations. The timing of 2 of those entries correlates exactly with incidents I reported to the Bellhaven PD and which subsequently went nowhere. The desk sergeant who took my reports. "Briggs?" Maya said. Nathan looked at her. "We pulled the incident report records this afternoon," she said. "Briggs handled 4 of your 7 filed reports. The other 3 went to different officers and had more thorough documentation, for whatever that's worth." She paused. "We've been looking at Briggs for a different matter for about 6 weeks. Nothing solid yet." "He's the reason my reports disappeared," Nathan said. "He's the reason 3 incidents that should have triggered a real investigation produced paperwork that went into a drawer somewhere." "Probably," Maya said. "And if Dahl knows that we're now in possession of the device log, he knows Briggs is exposed, which means Briggs has independent motivation to do something about this situation before we get to him. Which makes him unpredictable in a way that Dahl alone wouldn't be." "Yes." They sat with that for a moment. "Dahl won't come alone," Nathan said. "Even if we give him a reason to come here himself, he brings backup. If Briggs is his backup, then we have a corrupt law enforcement officer in the room, which changes the legal landscape of whatever happens here significantly," Maya finished. "I know." She looked at the camera on the south wall. "You're still recording?" "Continuously." "Good." She turned back. "I need to be honest with you about something." "Go ahead." "What you're describing, engineering a situation where Dahl comes here, gets recorded confessing or doing something actionable, that's a setup. And setups have legal edges that are genuinely complicated. If Dahl's defense team argues entrapment, he's been running a 2-year harassment and intimidation campaign against multiple property owners," Nathan said. "He authorized a criminal contractor operation, falsified environmental documentation, and last night sent 11 men to my garage. I'm not asking him to do something he wouldn't otherwise do. I'm giving him an opportunity to do what he's already demonstrated he intends to do. I know the distinction, Maya said. I'm saying a jury needs to see it clearly. Then we make sure the recording is clear. She was quiet for a moment. What's your bait? He'd been thinking about this since the afternoon. I make contact with Dahl directly, tonight. I tell him I want to negotiate. I tell him the federal investigation is moving faster than he expected and that I have the originals of Claire's documentation, the handwritten annotations, the source copies, and that I'm willing to discuss terms before it goes further. He won't believe you just want to negotiate. He doesn't have to believe it, Nathan said. He just has to believe that I have the originals and that there's a narrow window in which he might be able to recover them. A man who's been trying to get those documents for 14 months, who now has federal investigators in possession of a communications device that connects him directly to a criminal operation. That man doesn't need to fully trust the offer. He needs to be desperate enough that the potential upside outweighs the risk of coming. Maya looked at him carefully. You're going to put yourself in a room with Dahl and a potentially corrupt police officer. I've been in rooms with worse. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be reassuring, he said. It's meant to be accurate. She exhaled slowly. I want a team positioned outside. If anything develops, I need them far enough back that Dahl's approach to the building doesn't feel surveilled, Nathan said. He's careful. He'll have someone check the street before he comes in. How far back? Half a block minimum. But I need them ready to move fast. Maya looked at the garage, at the cameras, at the chair Nathan was sitting in, which was the same chair he'd been sitting in when she arrived at 1:40 in the morning, less than 18 hours ago. You haven't slept, she said. I slept a little. How little? Enough, he said, which they both understood to mean not very much at all. She stood up and walked to the side door and looked at the damaged frame, the bent bracket Nathan had partially reattached that afternoon. She stood there for a moment with her back to him. I'm going to get pushback from my supervisors on the operational setup, she said. The bait contact, the positioning, the timeline. I know. I'm going to ask for forgiveness rather than permission on some of this. I know that too. She turned around. If this goes wrong, I know what happens if it goes wrong, Nathan said. I've been doing this kind of math for 20 years. I don't go into situations I haven't calculated. You can't calculate everything. No, he said, but you can calculate enough. He called Dahl at 9:15 that night. He'd found the number through the Ashbourne Crown Corporate Directory where Dahl was still listed. Whatever internal chaos was now developing inside the company apparently hadn't yet reached the website. The phone rang 4 times and Nathan had already prepared his reaction to voicemail when the line connected. Silence for a moment. Then, who is this? Not a question, a flat statement that was really an assessment. Nathan had heard that particular vocal quality before in men who had learned to treat unexpected phone calls as potential threats. Nathan Cole, he said. Longer silence. Mr. Cole? Dahl's voice was controlled. Baritone, smooth in the way of someone who'd spent a long time in professional settings where voice control was a tool. I don't believe we've spoken before. We haven't, Nathan said. I thought it was past time. I'm not sure what you think we have to discuss. I think you know exactly what we have to discuss, Nathan said. I have things you want. You're in a position that's getting more complicated by the hour. I'm a man who's been having a very bad year and would like it to end. I think there's a conversation there. A pause. If you're suggesting some kind of negotiation, I'm not suggesting anything over the phone, Nathan said. I'm suggesting a conversation, face to face. Tonight, if you're available, or tomorrow morning early before the federal timeline moves another step. You understand that anything you think you have is likely inadmissible or fabricated, or the handwritten originals my wife made, Nathan said, not copies. The source documents with her annotations in her handwriting, the ones she pulled directly from the Meridian archive before she was let go. Those are what make the email chain actionable in a way that copies don't. You know that. That's why you've been trying to get them back for 14 months. He paused. I still have them. The federal team has copies, but not the originals. Not yet. The silence this time was different, calculated rather than controlled. Where? Dahl said. The garage, Nathan said. My property. If you're coming to negotiate, you come to the place this started. That's a pause. That's not a neutral location. No, Nathan said. It's not, but it's the one I'm offering. Another silence. Nathan waited. He was sitting in the dark of the office off the main bay, the door partially open, and through the gap he could see the recording indicator on the south wall camera, steady red in the dim. Lily was upstairs with explicit instructions that were more detailed and more serious than any previous version of the same instructions, and he had made her repeat them back to him and had looked her in the eye when she did. Tomorrow, Dahl said. 7 a.m. I'll be here, Nathan said. I'm always here. He ended the call and sat still for a moment, the phone in his hand, the garage quiet around him. Then he texted Maya 2 words. He's coming. Her response came back in under a minute. Don't do anything else tonight. Sleep. He looked at the message for a moment, then set the phone down, stood up carefully to accommodate his ribs, and went to check the camera feeds one more time before he tried. He slept 4 hours, which was less than needed and more than expected. At 5:30 he was up, and by 6 he had the garage in the specific state of arrangement he wanted. Not cleaned up, not staged to look welcoming, but organized in the way that communicated a particular thing, that this was a man's workspace, that he knew where everything was, that he'd been here a long time and intended to keep being here. The originals of Claire's documents were in a manila envelope on the work table, visible but not prominent. They were, in fact, the originals. If Dahl or anyone with him checked, and Nathan expected they would check, the documents would be authentic, because a fake at this stage introduced a vulnerability that Nathan wasn't willing to carry. The cameras were running. He'd done a systems check at 5:45 and all 4 feeds were clean and the upload was active. At 6:20, Maya texted to say her team was in position. She named the cross street, which put them at 60 yards from the garage entrance, which was about as close as Nathan had judged safe and slightly closer than he'd asked for. He decided not to argue about the 10 yards. At 6:48, Lily came down. Go back upstairs, he said immediately. I know, she said. I just wanted... She stopped. She was in her pajamas, hair loose, the specific appearance of someone who hadn't fully slept either. I want you to know I'm not scared. I know you're not scared. I mean, I'm a little scared, she said, but of the right things. Not of the people coming, more of... She stopped again and made a frustrated gesture with her hand, the gesture of someone whose vocabulary is running slightly short of what they need. More of something happening to you and me not knowing about it fast enough. Nathan crossed the garage and stood in front of her. He put his hand on her head the way he had for 11 years, and she leaned into it slightly the way she always did when she thought he wasn't going to notice. The moment anything starts, you call Maya's number, he said. Not mine, hers. You have it? In my phone. And you stay upstairs. Dad? Lily. She looked up at him. Her eyes were her mother's eyes, the same particular shade and the same quality of looking at things directly, without flinching, which was something Nathan had found beautiful in Claire and found almost difficult to look at straight on in his daughter because of what it reminded him of. Upstairs, he said. 3 knocks when it's done. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she went back up the stairs without argument, which told him she was more frightened than she was letting on, because under normal circumstances, the argument would have been longer. Dahl arrived at 7:04. He came in a dark sedan, not the vehicle from the corporate directory, but a private plate, which Nathan noted and which matched the level of care he'd expected. The car parked in the lot and 2 people got out. Dahl and 1 other. Nathan watched on the monitor from inside. Dahl was in his early 50s, heavier than his LinkedIn photograph suggested, with the kind of build that had once been muscular and had shifted over desk years into something denser and less defined. He was dressed casually by deliberate choice, not business, not wanting to look like someone arriving for a corporate transaction. In dark slacks and a jacket that Nathan could see was cut to accommodate something on his left side. The second man was in a Bellhaven PD jacket. Briggs. Nathan watched them approach the front. He went to the main vehicle door and opened it manually, the full width, because he wanted the space open and visible rather than forcing them through the smaller side entrance. He stood in the opening. Dahl stopped about 8 feet in front of him. Briggs stopped slightly behind and to the right, which was the positioning of someone providing backup rather than participating in a conversation. That positioning told Nathan several things simultaneously, including that Briggs understood his role here was enforcement rather than negotiation, which told Nathan that Dahl's read of this meeting was not primarily about talking. "Mr. Cole," Dahl said. "Mr. Dahl." They looked at each other in the early morning light. The waterfront sound was behind them both, gulls, a far-off engine, the low ambient noise of a harbor district waking up. "You look like you had a rough night," Dahl said, with the false, light quality of someone using casual observation to establish comfort with a situation they weren't comfortable with. "Few rough nights," Nathan said. "Come in." He turned and walked back into the garage without waiting to see if they followed, which communicated confidence and also removed him from the open doorway and put him back inside the space where he knew exactly where everything was. They followed. Dahl came in and scanned the garage with the systematic thoroughness of someone checking for variables. His eyes went to the cameras on the walls and stayed there for a moment. "Those running?" he said. "They're always running," Nathan said. Dahl nodded slowly as though that was fine, as though it didn't matter, which meant he'd already decided how he was going to handle the cameras being an issue. Nathan cataloged that. "The documents," Dahl said, "on the table." Nathan nodded toward the work table and the manila envelope. Dahl walked over and looked at it without touching it. He pulled on a pair of reading glasses from his jacket pocket and opened the envelope carefully and paged through several sheets. His expression as he went through them was the expression of someone confirming something they'd hoped to confirm. A small, controlled release of tension. "These are the originals," he said. "Yes." "Your wife was thorough." "She was," Nathan said. "She was very good at her job." Something moved across Dahl's face that was too brief to be certain about. Not guilt exactly, not quite enough architecture for guilt. More like an acknowledgement that existed and was immediately suppressed. "Here's what I think," Dahl said, closing the envelope. "I think you're in a difficult position, Mr. Cole. I think you've been in a difficult position for a while. I think the federal investigation your investigator friend is running is real, but I also think you understand that legal proceedings are slow and expensive and uncertain, and that the kind of certainty a man in your situation needs," he paused, "is the kind that doesn't depend on a federal timetable." "Say what you mean," Nathan said. "I mean a number," Dahl said, "a real one. For the property, for the documents, for your full cooperation in stepping away from the investigation." "You're offering to buy me out and buy my silence." "I'm offering you a resolution," Dahl said. "The property sells at twice its current market value. You and your daughter relocate. The federal matter becomes one in which you have a reduced role and less compelling evidence. Everyone moves forward." Nathan looked at him. "And the contamination? The people who'd be living above that groundwater in 5 years?" Dahl's expression didn't change much. "That's a regulatory matter that the company has protocols for managing." "Managing," Nathan repeated. "It's a complex issue with multiple variables and—" "You buried a contamination report," Nathan said. "You paid people to falsify an environmental assessment. You spent 2 years running intimidation campaigns against property owners who wouldn't sell. Not just me. Gerald Purcell at the Marine Supply Store. The family that ran the print shop on Keller Street. At least 3 others I've identified, probably more I haven't. You paid a police officer to make incident reports disappear." He paused. "And you're standing in my garage right now trying to buy me off because 11 men in federal custody are going to start talking when their attorney fees get too high and their deal offers start looking attractive." The air in the garage changed in a way that Nathan recognized. The way rooms changed when the performance portion ended and the actual intention became visible. Briggs moved. It was a small movement, a shift in weight, a hand going toward the jacket. And Nathan was already repositioning before it completed because he'd been watching Briggs since they walked in the door, and he'd noted the positioning and the role, and he'd known this was the probable shape of how Dahl intended this meeting to end. "Don't," Nathan said. His voice came out flat and specific, and it had a quality in it that he didn't use often and that came from a different place than ordinary conversation. Briggs stopped. Dahl said nothing. He was watching Nathan with the recalibrating expression of someone whose model of the situation has just required revision. "I want you to understand something," Nathan said. "I want you to understand it before you make a decision you can't walk back from." Neither man spoke. "Everything you've said in this building since you walked through that door is recorded," Nathan said. "The offer, the property, the documents, the mention of the federal investigation, the contamination being a regulatory matter. All of it, on 4 cameras, uploaded in real time to a server that 2 federal investigators currently have access to." He looked at Briggs. "Sergeant Briggs, I'd imagine this particular morning is going to define a fairly significant portion of the rest of your life, and I'd encourage you to think carefully about the next 30 seconds. Briggs's hand came away from his jacket. Dahl looked at the cameras on the walls again. He looked at the recording indicators. He looked at Nathan with an expression that passed through several phases: disbelief, calculation, fury, and then something darker that Nathan had seen in men when they'd arrived at the decision that the situation had passed beyond recoverable and the only remaining variable was how bad the exit was. "The documents on the table," Dahl said. "Yes." "You were never going to give them to me." "No," Nathan said. "I wasn't. This whole meeting was to give you the opportunity to say exactly what you said," Nathan confirmed, "and to put Briggs in a room where his choices were visible." Dahl looked at the floor. A long moment. The waterfront sounds came through the open vehicle door. The gulls, the distant engine, the ordinary morning continuing outside the building like it had no opinion about any of this. Then Dahl picked up the manila envelope from the work table. "Don't," Nathan said again. Dahl moved for the vehicle door at a pace that wasn't quite running, the envelope in his hand, Briggs stepping sideways to put himself between Nathan and the exit. Nathan didn't run after Dahl. He pressed the call button on his phone, which was connected to Maya's number, which was connected to the team at 60 yards down the street. He said one word: "Now." Then he looked at Briggs, who was still in the garage, who had not followed Dahl out the door, who was standing very still with his hand not near his jacket and his eyes doing the rapid calculation of someone who has just watched the person they came with make a terrible decision and is trying to determine whether they want to be associated with that decision or not. "You should sit down," Nathan said. Briggs sat down. Outside, the sound of car doors opening. Voices. Dahl had made it approximately 40 feet. Nathan could hear it all from the open vehicle door, the commands, the response, the specific sounds of a situation being controlled by people who had been waiting for it. Maya appeared in the vehicle door 2 minutes later, slightly out of breath, with the expression of someone who had been jogging at a controlled pace for 60 yards at 7 in the morning. "He ran," she said. "I know. He took the envelope." "He took your wife's documents?" "He took a manila envelope that contains copies," Nathan said. "I moved the originals to the lockbox this morning at 5:40. The copies are clean, and I have their record." He paused. "But I expect his fingerprints are now on an envelope containing documents he's been trying to recover for 14 months, which he took from the scene of a recorded conversation in which he offered to purchase my silence, which might be useful." Maya looked at him for a long moment. "Reston is with him?" she said into her radio. A response crackled back. She listened, nodded. "Good." She looked at Briggs on the folding chair against the east wall, sitting with his hands in front of him, in the posture of someone who has made a decision about the direction the next portion of his life is going to go. "Sergeant Briggs," she said, "I'm going to read you your rights, and then you and I are going to have a very long conversation. How you approach that conversation will matter significantly." Briggs looked at the floor. "I know," he said. His voice had the quality of something depleted. Nathan walked to the south wall camera and looked at the recording indicator. Still red, still running. He went to the intercom on the wall and pressed the button. 3 knocks, Lil." He climbed the stairs. He knocked 3 times. The door opened. Lily stood there in her pajamas with her phone in her hand and Maya's number on the screen, her thumb hovering over the call button she'd been ready to press. She looked at his face, checking the specific variables she'd learned to check over the past months: his posture, his hands, the quality of his breathing. "It's done?" she said. "It's done," he said. She exhaled. It was the exhale of someone who'd been holding something very carefully for a very long time, and Nathan recognized it because he felt something adjacent to it happening in himself. A slow release of a held thing, not complete yet, not finished. There were still proceedings and depositions and the long institutional tale of everything that had been set in motion, but the part that required him to stand between his daughter and whatever was coming, that part had ended somewhere in the previous hour on the garage floor. He put his hand on the side of her head. She leaned into it. "Come on," he said. "Let's make actual breakfast." The eggs that morning were better than the ones Lily had made the day before. Nathan made them himself this time, standing at the small stove in the apartment above the garage, while the sounds of the waterfront district came through the window and the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. And he cooked with the particular attention of someone who had been running on insufficient sleep and adrenaline for 36 hours and needed the ordinary task of cracking eggs and managing heat to bring him back to ground level. Lily sat at the table with both hands around her coffee mug. She'd started drinking coffee 6 months ago, weak and mostly milk, which Nathan had opinions about and had chosen not to voice because certain battles clarified themselves as not worth the energy. And she watched him cook with the quiet of someone who understood that the morning required a specific kind of gentleness and was capable of providing it. They ate without talking much. The eggs were good. The coffee was good. Outside, a truck moved down the waterfront road, and a gull made its complaint, and the ordinary world continued being ordinary, which was something Nathan had not taken for granted for a long time and found he was taking in now with a specific, conscious attention. "What happens next?" Lily said, when the plates were mostly empty. "A lot of legal process," Nathan said. "Depositions. Federal proceedings, probably 6 to 8 months of that before anything resolves formally. But the people, Dahl is in custody. Briggs is cooperating, which means the case against him is going toward a plea agreement. The men from the night before last are going to be looking at federal charges." He picked up his coffee. "The Meridian people who falsified the report, that's a separate proceeding, but it runs parallel." Lily absorbed this. "And the contamination?" "Ashbourne Crown is funding the remediation. Victoria Ashford committed to it in writing, and the federal agreement makes it a condition of the company's cooperation in the investigation. The North Parcel doesn't get touched for development until the groundwater situation is properly addressed, which is going to take a couple of years and cost significantly more than burying the original report cost them." He paused. "That part your mother would have found satisfying." Lily was quiet. She turned her mug slowly on the table. "Do you think she knew it would take this long? Like, when she kept the documents, did she think it would be all of this?" Nathan considered the question seriously. Claire had been a practical person, precise in her thinking, honest about timelines in a way that sometimes made her unpopular in meetings with optimistic project managers. She had known exactly how serious the contamination was, and exactly how inconvenient the truth of it would be to people with significant financial stakes in its suppression. "I think she knew it wouldn't be fast," Nathan said. "I think she kept the documents because she couldn't not keep them, and she trusted that keeping them was the right thing, even if she couldn't see all the way to the end of it." Lily nodded. Not the accepting nod of someone who was done thinking about it, but the nod of someone filing something carefully away. "I want to visit her," Lily said. "This weekend. The cemetery." "Yeah," Nathan said. "We'll go." My man. The legal proceedings moved at the pace that legal proceedings moved, which was slower than Nathan's patients found natural and faster than the defense teams would have preferred. He gave his deposition in the 4th week, sitting across a long conference table from federal attorneys with Maya present and his own attorney beside him, and he answered questions for 6 hours with the same flat, specific, sequential quality he'd brought to every after-action report he'd ever filed in a different kind of life. The recording from the garage. All of it, the night of the 27th attack and the morning of Dahl's visit, was entered into the federal record and reviewed extensively. Nathan's attorney had managed the legal edges of the setup carefully, and the entrapment argument that Dahl's defense raised was methodically dismantled by the breadth and duration of the documented prior conduct. You couldn't claim entrapment when the pattern of behavior stretched back 2 years across multiple victims and was comprehensively documented. Briggs's cooperation opened additional threads that the federal investigation hadn't fully anticipated. He had been on Dahl's payroll for slightly over 2 years, which overlapped precisely with the start of the Belle Haven Corridor acquisition campaign. He had suppressed 8 incident reports across 5 property owners, not 3 as Nathan had initially estimated. 2 of those other property owners were located and interviewed, and what they described, the incidents, the sudden resolution of their complaints, the sense that the police department was somehow not available to them in the way it was supposed to be, added dimensions to the case that went beyond Nathan's garage and beyond the Cole parcel and became, in the hands of the federal prosecutors, evidence of a systematic pattern. Gerald Purcell, the owner of the marine supply store, gave a deposition that Nathan was told lasted nearly 4 hours. The family who had run the print shop for 30 years declined to give depositions on advice of their own counsel, but submitted written statements that were incorporated into the record. Nathan thought about all of them more than he mentioned to anyone. The people who had sold and left, who had given up their properties under a sustained pressure campaign that was invisible from the outside because the police weren't doing anything about it, and the company running it had a respectable public face and a CEO who didn't know it was happening. He thought about what it must have felt like to believe the system wasn't going to help you, and have no particular military training or embedded evidence or specialized personal fury to fall back on. He thought about the fact that he was still standing in large part because of skills he'd developed for entirely different purposes in a different chapter of his life, and that the people who weren't still standing had simply lacked those specific resources, and that the outcome of a situation shouldn't depend on whether the person being victimized happened to have been a Navy SEAL. That thought stayed with him. It informed a decision he'd been working toward since the morning after. Victoria Ashford came to the garage for the second time about 6 weeks after Dahl's arrest. She came alone again, no driver this time, and she parked her own car in the lot and came through the side door, the frame of which Nathan had properly repaired by then, and found him under the Camaro. "You could knock," he said from under the car. The door was open. He rolled out on the creeper and stood up, wiping his hands. She looked less composed than she had on either of the previous visits, which he read as a good sign. Put-together people who stayed put together through serious crisis were either very strong or very practiced at suppression, and he hadn't yet determined which one she was. The slight fraying visible now suggested strong, which was more useful. "How are the proceedings going?" he said. "Complicated," she said. "My legal team is managing the cooperation agreement. The remediation contract is signed. The environmental firm starts on the north parcel next month." She paused. "The company is going to survive this. I want you to know that's not my primary concern right now, but it's true." "What is your primary concern right now?" She looked around the garage. At the cameras, which were still mounted and still running, though the recording indicator was dark, he'd switched to motion-activated since the proceedings had moved to a stage where continuous documentation wasn't necessary. At the Camaro with its hood up, at the organized tools on the pegboard. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You didn't know what was happening." "I know I didn't know," she said. "The apology isn't for what I did. It's for what the company I ran did to you and your daughter, and to your wife's memory, and to everyone else in this corridor who was pushed out by something that was operating under my name." She met his eyes directly. "I understand those aren't the same thing legally. They're the same thing to me." Nathan looked at her for a moment. The apology was real. He'd developed a fairly reliable detector for the performed version over the years, and this wasn't it. It was the apology of someone who had sat with something uncomfortable long enough that they needed to say it out loud, less for the listener's benefit than for the sake of their own honesty. "I accept it," he said. Something released slightly in her posture. Not dramatically. She wasn't a dramatic person. He'd established that. But visibly. "I want to do something," she said. "For the corridor. For the community specifically. There's a community benefit component that was always theoretically part of the waterfront plan, and I want to make it real rather than theoretical, and I want it to include input from the people who were here before the acquisition campaign started." She paused. "People like Gerald Purcell. People like you." "I'm not interested in being included in an Ashbourne Crown Community initiative," Nathan said. I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking if you'd be willing to consult, independently, on what the community actually needs from a development of this scale, if it happens at all." She let that land. The contamination remediation might reveal that the north parcel isn't suitable for the kind of development we planned. If that's what the science says, that's what it says. Nathan looked at her. You'd walk away from a billion-dollar development project if the remediation science doesn't support it. I'd revise it, she said. Significantly, if necessary. I'm not walking away from Bellhaven. I'm walking away from the version of this project that was built on falsified information and criminal conduct. He thought about that for a moment. The difference between a person who said that and meant it and a person who said it as the best available performance was, ultimately, a question of time. You found out which one someone was by watching what they did when the choice became concrete and expensive. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. She left the way she'd come, and Nathan watched her car back out of the lot and pull away. And then he went back under the Camaro because the oil line still needed doing and the car had been waiting patiently for long enough. The decision he'd been working toward announced itself clearly about 2 months after Dahl's arrest, on a Saturday morning when he was at the hardware store and ran into a kid he vaguely recognized, 17, maybe 18 from the neighborhood, who had apparently been told by someone that Nathan Cole sometimes took on apprentices in the garage and wanted to know if that was true. Nathan had not, in fact, ever taken on apprentices in the garage. The kid had received inaccurate information from whatever neighborhood network had generated the rumor. But Nathan stood in the hardware store aisle with a can of primer in his hand and looked at the kid, who was nervous in the specific way of people who want something and aren't certain they're allowed to want it, and thought about several things simultaneously. He thought about what his father had given him when he handed a 17-year-old a rag in a garage and showed him what to do with it. He thought about the print shop family and Gerald Purcell and the other business owners who had been pushed out of the corridor and the gap their absence had left, and the particular texture of a community from which the long-established working things were systematically removed. He thought about Lily, who came downstairs in the evenings and sat on the rolling stool and watched him work, and had started asking questions that were increasingly specific and increasingly good. He thought about the SEAL skill sets that had allowed him to survive something that had pushed out people without those specific advantages. He thought about what it meant to have something to give, and whether you owed the giving of it to anyone specific or just to the general direction of the world. Not officially, Nathan told the kid, but come by Saturday mornings and we'll see. The kid's name was Darius, and he showed up the following Saturday at 8 a.m., which was earlier than Nathan had specified, and turned out to have genuinely good instincts and genuinely poor technique and the specific combination of self-consciousness and real curiosity that made someone worth teaching. By the third Saturday, he'd brought a friend. By the sixth, there were 4 of them in the garage on Saturday mornings, and Nathan had reorganized the workflow to accommodate it, and Lily had appointed herself the person who managed the radio and the coffee, a role she had not been assigned and which Nathan had decided not to contest. The formal version came later, a nonprofit structure, a partnership with the Bellhaven Vocational Education Program, a small grant that Maya quietly helped him identify through federal community development channels that she was not, strictly speaking, supposed to be steering applicants toward, but that she did anyway, and that Nathan accepted without making a significant production of the ethics of it because the practical outcome was right. The Cole Garage Apprenticeship Program took its first official cohort of 8 students 6 months after Dahl's sentencing, which came down to 11 years federal, with additional civil liability attached to the contamination concealment that was going to be litigated separately and expensively for a long time. Briggs received 4 years on the cooperation plea, which his own family publicly described as insufficient and which Nathan had no particular opinion about because it wasn't his call, and the proceeding had been fair by the standards that proceedings were evaluated. The Meridian Assessment Group principals received separate charges that worked through a parallel federal process and landed where they landed, which was not nothing. The Camaro, Nathan finished in the 7th month. He'd started it, his father had started it before him, and he drove it out of the garage on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring and around the block once and back into the garage, and Lily, who had come home from school and found him doing this, stood in the lot with her arms crossed watching him park it. "That's it?" she said. "You drove it around the block?" "That's it," he said. 4 years of work, and you drove it around the block. It drives well, he said. The block is fine. She shook her head in the way she'd inherited from Claire, the specific movement of someone who found a situation simultaneously exasperating and not entirely surprising. You're so weird, she said. I know, Nathan said. Victoria came back a third time in the fall, almost a year after the morning she'd stood in the garage and heard about 11 men on the floor and contamination reports and her VP of site acquisition operating a criminal intimidation network under the umbrella of her company. She came in the late afternoon when the light was doing the gold and low thing off the waterfront that Nathan had grown up watching, and she stood outside for a moment looking at the building before she came in. The garage was in the middle of a session. 2 of the apprentices were at the station nearest the door, working on a mid-90s pickup that one of them had brought in for assessment. Another was at the parts bench doing inventory, which was not the most glamorous component of automotive work and which Nathan had explained was nonetheless non-negotiable. Lily was on the rolling stool near the south wall with a textbook open on her lap and the radio low. Victoria stood in the open doorway and looked at all of it. The organized activity, the tools on the pegboard, the south wall camera still mounted, the motion indicator dark. Nathan came out from behind the pickup. The door's open, he said. I noticed, she said. Last time I was here, you said that some battles were finally over. I think I said getting there. You said some battles were finally over, she repeated. And I've been thinking about that for a while. He looked at her. And I wanted to come back and ask you what you meant by it, whether it was about the legal proceedings or about something else. She looked at the garage around him. Because it looks like something else. Nathan considered the question. In the background, one of the apprentices asked the other something about torque specifications, and the other one gave a wrong answer with confidence, and Nathan filed it for correction in about 30 seconds when the conversation found its natural conclusion. What he meant when he said it, standing in the early morning light with Doll in custody outside and Lily upstairs and 36 hours of no sleep and the taped cut finally starting to properly heal on his eyebrow, was something he hadn't fully articulated even to himself at that moment. It had been more feeling than sentence, but a year of distance clarified it. He'd spent 14 months fighting to stay in place, to protect a piece of ground that mattered to him because of who had stood on it before him and what it meant to still be standing on it. And there was nothing wrong with that fight. It had been a right fight, and he'd been right to see it through. But a fight to stay in place was still just a fight. It was the minimum. It was the defensive perimeter. What the garage had become in the months since was something different. It was the thing you built after you secured the perimeter and looked around and asked what you were actually defending it for. I meant that surviving something isn't the same as doing something with the survival, he said. I spent a year and a half doing a version of what I used to do in the military, identifying a threat, preparing a response, waiting for the right moment to act. And I was good at it because I'd been trained for it. But that's not a life, that's a holding pattern. Victoria was quiet, listening. The people who were pushed out of this corridor didn't have what I had, he said. They had the same right to stay that I had. They just didn't have the specific skill set that let me enforce it. And I kept thinking about that, about the randomness of it, about how the outcome shouldn't have depended on whether I happened to have SEAL training. He looked at the 2 apprentices at the station near the door. I can't undo what happened to them. I can't give Gerald Purcell his store back, but I can do something with what I know and what I've got, for the people who are here now. That's what this is, Victoria said. Not a question. That's what this is, he said. She looked at the garage for a moment longer, at Lily on the rolling stool who had looked up from her textbook and was watching the conversation with the alert attention of someone who had learned to read the room. The community benefit consultation, Victoria said. Is that still on the table? It's still on the table, Nathan said. On my terms. Your terms, she said. The people who were displaced from this corridor get seats at the table, not token seats. Real input on what gets built and where and what it does for the neighborhood that's already here. If the remediation science says the north parcel needs to be parks and open space instead of residential towers, then that's what it is. Agreed. And the garage stays, he said. Whatever gets built around it, whoever develops whatever ends up getting developed, this building stays. My family has been here 61 years. The garage stays, she said. I'll put that in writing today. Nathan nodded. Then yes, it's on the table. She left through the open door, and the gold light was still doing its thing off the waterfront, and Nathan stood in the entrance for a moment watching her go and watching the water beyond the dock structures, which looked the way it always looked at this hour, briefly and completely beautiful. Behind him, the apprentice with the wrong torque answer received the correction from Nathan without being aware that Nathan had registered the original error from 20 feet away while conducting an entirely separate conversation, which was one of those things that former SEALs were able to do and which Nathan had decided was useful in a teaching context and would not be explained. Lily appeared at his elbow. She seems less intense than last time, she said. She's had a year to breathe, Nathan said. Are you going to work with her? Probably. Lily considered this. Mom would have had an opinion about that. Your mother had an opinion about everything, Nathan said. That was one of her best qualities. Lily smiled at that, the real smile, the one that got into her eyes, which she didn't produce automatically and which Nathan had learned to not take for granted. Yeah, she said. It was. They stood in the entrance together for a moment, the garage active and warm behind them, and the waterfront evening coming in off the water. And Nathan thought about what it meant to be here, still here, specifically here, in this building his grandfather had wired and his father had worked, and that 11 men and a corrupt police officer and a VP of site acquisition with a criminal operation and 14 months of sustained pressure had not managed to remove him from. He thought about Claire's voice on the recording, patient and deliberate and made to last. The reason I kept these documents isn't because I'm brave. It's because the alternative was knowing and not doing anything. The thing about that, Nathan had come to understand, was that it applied past the documents. It applied past the garage. It applied to every version of the question. What do you know, and what are you going to do with the knowing? He'd spent most of his adult life being trained to do things with what he knew. The military had taken that capacity and pointed it at targets and at the protection of specific people in specific situations. The past 14 months had taken it and pointed it at this building and at the truth his wife had left him. The next chapter was pointing it at something larger and less defined and more ongoing, at the apprentices in the garage and the corridor community, and the slow work of ensuring that what had happened here didn't happen to the next person who just wanted to stay in the place they'd built their life. That work didn't have a completion date. There wasn't a moment you'd step back from it and call it done. It was the kind of thing that just kept going, and you kept showing up for it. And some days that was enough, and some days it wasn't quite enough. But you showed up anyway. Nathan had made his peace with that kind of work a long time ago. Come on, he said to Lily, let's go finish what we started. She rolled her eyes in exactly the way her mother used to. You always say that like it means something specific. It always means something specific, he said. I just let you figure out what. He turned back into the garage, back toward the pickup, and the apprentices, and the evening's remaining work. And the door stayed open behind him, the way it had always been open in the hours when the building was alive and in use, the way his father had kept it open and his grandfather before that. An open door at the edge of the waterfront facing whatever came, built to last. Some buildings are just buildings. They hold what you put in them, and they depreciate on a schedule, and eventually someone sells them or tears them down and puts something else in their place. And some buildings become something else over time. They absorb the lives lived inside them, the grief and the stubbornness, and the long patience of people who refuse to be moved. And they become the kind of place that holds a shape in the world that means something to the street it's on and the people who pass it and the ones who come through the door knowing that someone is going to be there. Nathan Cole's garage was the second kind. It had taken 61 years and one very determined family and a fight that nearly broke several things to make it that, but it had made it, and the door was open and the light inside was on.